shit. I'm not sure you noticed this, but there has been an increase in anti-Asian hate crimes recently. Like from this tweet that John Horgan sent out. And if you were brain dead on social media, you wouldn't have seen it. But recently, there's been a massive trend of posting stuff on your story that looks like this or this. And even though I know some stuff is a little cringe, I think that there needs to be a little talk about it. And so, let's get into it. This video isn't going to be talking about whether or not anti-Asian racism exists. That's like making a video on why the earth isn't flat. Everybody already knows that the earth is round. Alright, moving on. We're going to be talking about what I think one of the main reasons why anti-Asian racism isn't talked about that much. And I am going to be talking about culture. Now, before we get into how culture contributes to anti-Asian racism, I just wanted to define a couple of terms, or define this one very important term. We will go into the dictionary. As it is stated in this dictionary, a model minority is a minority demographic whose members are perceived to achieve a higher degree of socioeconomic success than the population average, thus serving as a reference group to outgroups. Dear God, that is fucking... Great, so we define that. So why does that matter? Well, even though people perceive Asians currently in North America as a model minority, it devalues the racism that we actually experience in real life. Saying that somebody is a model minority means that you are basically claiming that they are immune to racism, that they don't receive racism because they're a model minority, right? This myth is pretty clear. The reason this model minority myth really contributes to the racism that Asians face is it because the reason why the model minority myth contributes to the racism that Asians face is because it pressures people who experience racism to not report racism because they have the fear of having their experience delegitimized, saying, no, you're Asian, you guys don't experience racism, you guys are the model minority, right? So, not only that, but it also pressures those who were going to report their experience with anti-Asian racism, not because they want to uphold that same myth that Asians are above other races and that they don't experience any racism. So therefore, I will not report it because we don't experience racism or we can't experience racism. Now I know what you're thinking. Great, Nick. We define model minority. Why should we care? And I think the reason why people should understand what this model minority myth is because it really affects the way that people portray the Asian race. When you look at this survey over here, alright, let's just shift over a little bit. When taking a look at a survey from the Pew Research Institute, it found that Asians were the most targeted group when it came to either name calling, microaggressions, and slurs, and just pressures, right? does that make their experience worse than others who have received physical assault and stuff like that? Well, I'm not comparing the two, but I'm saying that if Asians are targeted in this way, does that make their experience with racism devalued? No, exactly. Basically, what I'm trying to say is the model minority myth, it really contributes to the way that people perceive Asians. When using this belief, it is very difficult to try to appeal for help with your experience with racism. It's very hard because you're pressured by this previous myth from society that you aren't supposed to be experiencing this, and that this experience with racism was a fluke. Because you're a model minority, you're not supposed to be experiencing racism. So when you experience this racism, you should just ignore it because it rarely happens. And that's why I think that this model minority myth is really dangerous, because it leads to underreporting. Evidence of underreporting can be observed in this police report for the month of March. When comparing the total amount of hate crimes recorded this month in the top 14 largest American cities, the number is dwarfed by the amount of reports that AAPI, an independent organization, recorded. This disparity between an independent organization's data and a police organization's data can be credited to the model minority myth, but also Asian culture. Now, apart from all the jokes of Asian parents being like, why you no doctor? Why you no lawyer? Why you no doctor? Why am I not a doctor? We all know that Asian culture, especially in North American households, and especially Canadian households, is that there are traditions in your family that, depending on how strict your parents are, you'll follow them. I feel that traditionalist values in Asian culture contribute to anti-Asian racism because it emphasizes a lot of hard work and dedication and self-improvement. And when you look at those traits, it usually means focusing on yourself and bettering yourself. And that is good. It has benefited us in the past, especially when moving to a new country and trying to establish a thriving community in a new area that you've never been in. But in modern day society, I think it's really detrimental because it encourages people to not report the crimes that they have experienced and instead simply try to work harder so that they won't experience it. And although that is an effective way of coping, I think that in the end, it harms Asians and those who experience Asian racism, because when you don't report the racism that you experience, you won't be represented when people start to ask, right? If you don't report your experience with racism to the police, when people start sending out reports of like the number of people who experience hate crimes in this month, you will not be part of that statistic. And I think that that's really dangerous, and it harms Asians because then Asians become really misrepresented in data. And I think that that's why people have a certain perception about the Asian race, because people see the Asian race as a model minority. And we talked about model minority earlier. But the fact that we are underrepresented in data, and that a lot of the reports that are sent out recording the amount of hate crimes to each race and then having Asians as one of the lowest is really misleading, and that inaccurate data stems from Asian culture and the willingness to simply accept a racist experience and simply live with that and not report it. And that's why I think that Asian culture really contributes to the way that people perceive the Asian race, and how that perception really leads to more anti-Asian hate crimes and more problems. A simple example can be the vandalism of a storefront in New York. right? Although this man's Korean restaurant was completely like vandalized, had slurs written all over it, he chose to not report it because he didn't believe that the police would do anything about it, right? And another example could be simply from the police reports coming from March from the CSRUB over here, right? They gave you a chart of the top 14 cities in America and how many were reported. Back in March, AAPI, which is an independent organization which reports and fields hate crimes, reported that they received approximately 1,500 cases in the month of March, while another source found that the amount of cases reported to the police were only 122 collected from 14 of the largest cities, while approximately 1,500 cases were reported to an independent organization, right? Because people don't want to deal with the police and they don't feel like it would be in their best interest. And I think that's crazy because the difference between those two statistics, that's almost an 1,200% difference. That's huge. And that means that all those people that didn't report their crimes to the police won't be represented in a statistic that will be published by a highly reputable source. I think that is very concerning. So, Asian culture definitely has contributions to anti-Asian racism because you have to start with stuff from inside the community. And I know what you're thinking. Yeah, Nick, Asian culture contributes to anti-Asian racism because people don't report stuff to authorities and instead they go to independent organizations because they don't feel like they're going to get help, and this leads to misrepresentation and inaccurate data from reputable sources such as the police or the government when publishing reports about hate crime. Yeah, that's exactly it. But that's not going to be the only reason why anti-Asian hate crimes are perceived differently in North America than any other race, and also that's not the only reason why I think that culture contributes to that problem. I think that North American culture also has a lot to do with that. And so let's get into it. North American culture is great. You got memes, which really are... The thing with North American culture, especially when it comes to racism, is there's a lot of competition. And recently, there's been a development in society where people are competing for victimhood. Yeah. So, let's get into an example. So I know what you're probably thinking. Nick, I don't know what victimhood is. Alright, I'll explain it to you. Let's say you had something. We're going to use an example. You had a book. Yeah, we'll go with a book. Yeah, books seem good. You can check out my other video about books. But let's say they had a really nice book, all right, and you like that book, and then somebody comes and steals that book, all right, you would be sad, right? Would you be sad? Huh? I would be furious. So somebody comes and steals that book, and you're gonna go, hey, that's not right. That guy should not steal my book. And somebody goes up to you and says, hey, at least you had a book and somebody could steal that book. That is what victimhood is. Basically, somebody is trying to become the bigger victim in a situation. Sometimes it might not even apply to them, right? They could come out of absolutely nowhere. You are so lucky to be in that position. Other people would die to be in that position. Like, that's not the problem. Somebody is talking about their experience, and you're coming in here and trying to invalidate somebody's experience by saying, hey, this person has it worse. That's not the point. That's not the point. What the? Last but not least, we gotta talk about social media and how it really contributes. Having representation in social media is really important. Like, it's pretty clear that when we're talking about like racism and social justice, that Black Lives Matter dominates the social media verse, right? Just look at this. Like, when you search up on Instagram in tags, like, look at the difference in disparity. It's huge. It's huge. Almost everything. And so when a small group of people are trying to speak out about an issue that they experience, it's likely not going to be heard, right? It's likely going to be overshadowed by, say, another problem. It might not be as important, or it might be even more important, but because it has a larger following, it's clearly going to get more attention. And just by looking at the disparity between, let's say, the Black Lives Matter movement and the AAPI hashtag, right, which embodies the anti-Asian hate crime movement, right? It's pretty clear which one is getting more media coverage, and social media is where a lot of people get their source of information. And this is why I think that social media contributes to anti-Asian hate crimes, is because there's so little representation and so little information out there in social media, right? Like, how are you supposed to find information or have an opinion about something when you don't know that it even exists, or it rarely exists? So having a small presence on social media is pretty detrimental. When you look at like the Black Lives Matter movement, they had a massive movement on social media, which got so big that even mainstream media was able to pick it up, right? Like, we're talking about like hashtag Blackout Tuesday and like Black Creator Day on different social media platforms. It was big, and there was a massive movement because they just accumulated so much attention and social media presence. And because there are so many people on the internet that have their own opinions and they will deem what they want to support, usually the ones with the smallest following or online presence will get lost in social media and won't pick up anything, right? So recently we saw a massive uptick in hashtag AAPI with the recent Atlanta shootings and stuff like that, and people started posting on their story, and then more people started to pick up on, hey, like, this was an hate crime against Asians. And I think that that's when things really start to click, right? So will social media stop racism? No, that's a stupid question. Like, posting on your story or anything won't physically stop racism from happening. Do you understand that? So what is my solution? I think my solution to this recent uptick in anti-Asian hate, and especially in Canada, is more presence on social media. And by presence, I don't just mean posting posts on your story, although that helps it's a very small component of making change. There's very important steps that need to be made, and I think that developing a larger presence on social media is very important, because the larger your social media presence, the more power almost you have over the mediaverse, right? You can influence mainstream media, get more coverage for your community, and that is really important. So posting on your Instagram and stuff like that, yeah, like, it helps, but it doesn't do that much. I think that the next thing that people have to do is, we, as an Asian community, there has to be change, right? There has to be a shift in deal with racism. And although traditionalist views are keep your head down, try to outwork them so then they can't say anything, there has to be more accurate reporting. You can't report to an independent organization and expect to have your data represented in, say, government documents or police police documents. It would be really helpful if independent organizations such as AAPI and stuff like that would share their data with the government and all other police departments across all of North America, but it is very, very difficult to work like between organizations. So it would be really helpful if independent organizations should start sharing their data and letting their data be represented in authentic police reports. And then that can help solve the issue with misrepresentation of data or inaccurate data. And that's really important because it will show a shift in the model minority belief. There's plenty of people that don't believe that Asians experience racism, and when there is accurate data of people reporting their hate crimes or their experience with racism to official documents, I think that more people will begin to recognize, like, okay, hey, like, it's not just a fluke that this happened to an Asian person. This actually consistently happens. And once we're able to have correct representation in our data, I think that is when we can slowly just change the way that our experience with racism is perceived. And I think that's really important.